Hi, everybody. I hope y'all had a really good spring break. Welcome back to e-learning. Before I get started, I just wanted to say that I hope everybody is doing well. I hope you guys are safe and healthy and happy. And I miss you tons and tons. All right, so the purpose of this intro video is to talk about the changes to the human geography test, and then to also give you some insight into how a review for the next 5 weeks is going to work in this class. So bear with me. There's a lot of information I'm going to throw at you, but hopefully it's helpful. There's nothing for you to turn in today on Google Classroom except for a Google form, and it's just really I'm just kind of curious as to where you are right now in terms of your level of comfort and I don't know, just generally how you're feeling, I guess. So just look for that on under classwork on Google Classroom. Okay, so let's talk about the test. So the exam was moved a week, just 1 week. So that means we have 5 weeks and a day. So today is kind of like, 5 weeks from tomorrow is your test on May 12th at 3 p.m. This is really interesting because everybody who is taking this test, regardless of time zone, is taking this test at the same time. So if you're in China, I think that's like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. It's really wacky. All right, so you are going to need to log on at 2:30 p.m. to access the online testing system and get set up. Now, I think that you guys know this already, but the test is going to be online. There are a couple of other options, which I'll get to in just a minute. But honestly, if your login for College Board is not working, or if you are still struggling to access those progress checks that I have been sharing with you, you need to call College Board ASAP. Um, there's actually two dates for the exam, but I'm going to really highly, firmly, super strongly suggest that you take the early test first, because if something wacky happens with your computer, you want to make sure that you have some wiggle room to take the makeup test if you need to. So let's just go with May 12th is our test. Okay, so what do you need to take the AP test? So you can actually take the AP test on a desktop, on a laptop, on a Chromebook, on an iPad, or on your phone. But I'm going to suggest that a Chromebook, an iPad, a Chromebook, a laptop, or a desktop is probably going to be your best bet. It's going to be easiest for you to type your answers to the FRQs, which I'll get to in a minute. But if your iPhone or your iPad are your only options, please do use those. And then last but not least, there is an opportunity for you to handwrite. I don't recommend this, especially for some of you that I've been struggling with in terms of reading your handwriting. This is like a gift, so take it. But if you have no other options, you can handwrite it, and then further instructions about how to upload your handwritten FRQ will come later, and I'll touch upon that as soon as I get the information. So what is the format? So here we go. There are going to be two free response questions. Question number one is going to have two stimuli. It's going to be 25 minutes, but it'll be 55% of the exam score. Question two is going to be 15 minutes. It's going to have one stimulus, and it's going to make up 45% of the exam score. Now, what's really interesting, and actually, let me see, do I get to this? No. What's really interesting is that you have 25 minutes to write, and then you're going to have 5 minutes to upload. And then you'll start the second question, and the same process will happen. You'll have 15 minutes to write, and then you'll have 5 minutes to upload. And so that's kind of how it's going to work. So you don't have I don't know. I think more information is going to be forthcoming. We don't quite know yet all of the details. Okay, so what is a stimulus? A stimulus can be any of those things that we looked at. So it could be a population pyramid. It could be a map, a thematic map like this. It could be an image. Now, this image represents all kinds of different units if you're looking at it. And there's aspects of political in here. There's aspects of culture in here. There's migration in here. And the reason why I'm pointing that, there's cultural landscape in here, and the reason why I'm pointing that out, I will get to on the next slide. Here's another potential stimulus that could be on here, and I chose this one because I just had you all take a look at urban, the few things from urban that we covered. And so you might have to analyze this particular graph. And so you'll have to look very carefully at what's happening in Lincoln Park, which is an area in Chicago that's kind of like fancy-ish. And you can see if you're looking at this, you might ask or be asked to identify how this graph or table represents gentrification. And some things that you can use is the shift in ethnicity, so some culture stuff. You could look at the median household income and how it increases, like the value of houses increased dramatically over time, which indicates that it's becoming a better area in the city. And at the same time, you have your ethnic groups declining over time. All of those families living below poverty is decreasing as well. And it's a sad state or fact, but generally speaking, and you learn this in Unit 3.2 when we talked about ethnicity, there are certain areas, certain parts of the city that tend to be higher in poverty, and those also tend to be disproportionately areas of ethnic minorities. So you could be asked all kinds of things like a stimulus on this. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, well, Truex, like, we're not going to be tested on urban, are we? I don't know. The jury's out on that, and I have a video that I'm going to show you later in this presentation, and then we'll talk more about that at our next meeting. Okay, so again, which units may be assessed? For sure, units 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But just like I said a second ago, that doesn't mean that industry and that the economic and industry unit or that urban is completely out. But y'all, I am so happy that I taught you the economic and industry unit. I feel like the economic development unit that we did second is really foundational for this course. And the fact that y'all have that under your belt already is super, super important to me. And we'll talk about why momentarily. Okay, so this guy, David Palmer, he's kind of one of, I have all my Facebook friends. He's one of the who's on the AP Human Geography Facebook page, and he put together a video, and it's a little bit longer, so I'm going to pause it and kind of like bring up points as I think of them. But there was a lot of chatter for the last week, actually probably the last 2 weeks, about how just because we're not talking about urban and economic geography doesn't necessarily mean that we haven't kind of peripherally talked about it already. So I'm going to let David talk to you about what that means and what that could look like. And then there's another video where he's going to talk about ag, but I'm going to post that when we start reviewing ag. So just kind of watch, and I'll pause and interject like I always do. Oops, that didn't work. Let's try again. Oh, how about
Palmer, how you guys doing? We're going to talk about Urban Geography 2020 on the AP exam this year. And the FRQs are just going to cover units 1 through 5 this year on that test that's going to be 45 minutes long. But Urban Geography has a lot of crossover content that covers multiple units. Now, this video is going to deal with units 1 through 4. And urban is this big synthesis unit that brings things together. And so we want to make sure that we're connecting pieces together. Now, ag has so many connections with urban that it gets its very own video. But you know what? What every good geographic journey needs is a good pair of shoes. So let's get going on a great big geography walk.
He's weird. I'm sorry.
So let's get this journey going. Hey, there's a bunch of key vocab from the urban unit. And while there's no urban focused FRQ this year, you better be ready because there are some big concepts that you need to know. They're going to make your FRQs better because we want our FRQs to rock. And I've listed a bunch of things here. And what I'm going to do is on each slide, I'm going to talk about elements of each of the first 4 units and possible connections that could exist on the AP test. And the more urban you know, especially in the areas that I'm going to focus on, the better off you're going to be and the more you're going to perform on the test. So if you don't remember this list, come back and look at it in a few minutes. Hey, and you know what? It would be nice to know the location of a few big cities, and I'll show you why here in a moment. So unit 1 is all about thinking geographically or thinking spatially. And I've listed here on the left, you can see 1.1, 1.2. And there's some big ideas here about reading a map. And cities are big clues on looking at map and trying to figure out where in the world you're looking at. And they can point you in the right direction and illustrate that. And then you see this word scale, geographic data, scale, power of data, scale, scales of analysis, regional analysis, scale. Hey, when a word's repeated that many times, scale's a big deal. And so when we talk about scale, are we looking at the local scale, the regional scale? Local scale could be city scale. Regional scale might be a metropolitan area, country scale, global scale, national scale. So understanding scale at different levels of issues is a big deal. Now, relative location 1.4. This is similar to situation, and site and situation was on the list. And site is what is the stuff that's available at a certain location, and situation is proximity to what? Proximity to a port, proximity to natural resources, proximity to soil and farmland. So situation does matter. And so make sure you don't ignore situation in your study and site as well.
Okay, so just to kind of re-emphasize what he said there and not to make this video super, super long, but site and situation are both urban vocabulary words, but as was just pointed out, relative location and situation have a heck of a lot to do with one another. He's going to talk about this map, but I think that this map, I mean, he's making some really valid points. When you look at this map, you know that those bright spots here represent cities, right? So you can tell a lot about the distribution of cities here in the United States based on just on this map. This corridor, when we talked about, I think we talked about this corridor actually, the New York, Philadelphia, Washington, Boston. I said that out of order, but you get the gist. Where all of these metropolises, they just kind of converge. It's called conurbation. We talked about this as well, but there are some reasons for this. And I'll not step on my friend of theirs toes. I'm going to let him talk a little bit more about why this map is relevant and why urban could show up peripherally.
So let's look at this. So here we go. We've got an urban systems map, and we need to be able to look at it. And as we look at the map, we can see some things. It would be nice to know what city this is, Minneapolis, and that this is New York, and Denver's over here, and LA's down here. This will help your responses. So this is a geography class, and if you write an entire essay and haven't mentioned anything specifically about a geographic location, hmm, I wonder if you're going to be in the top pile. So you want to think about that and making sure that you know some of these locations and know some of the big city locations of the world and of the United States. Here's another one. You're going to
Also, that last map, hopefully you're thinking about this too in terms of types of maps. That was a dotted density map as review. And this thing that you're seeing right up here is another example of a potential stimulus that you could see on an FRQ.
be asked on the test most likely to look at some charts or graphs or data. And in this graph, you can see it's a graph of total fertility right here. And then we have some dates on the side. And then we have these words, rural counties, small or medium metro counties, large metro counties. Well, this is a population graph, but if you don't know what the word rural and urban and metro means, this graph might be a little bit difficult for you to understand. So make sure you understand the concept of metro area, even though those sound like, and they are urban concepts. This question and this data is focused on a population pattern. So keep in mind with that. Now, I just mentioned population to you, and there's a variety of connections within the population unit that we need to be aware of. So 2.3 here is population composition of pyramids. And two big concepts come to mind here. It mentions in here scale and markets. Well, what are cities? Markets, one of their biggest things is goods and services are provided there. So we need to understand how to read population pyramids. So we have a couple population pyramids over here. We have Tampa, Florida. Now you should know that Tampa, Florida is a city, and this is the composition of the population pyramid of Tampa. And then here's Utah. Now the scale of this is by state, and they look different, but whatever answer you provide, make sure you're answering at the proper scale of analysis. City scale, state scale. 2.10 here, push and pull factors. So this is migration. We know that cities are centers of goods and services, and that's one of the big reasons that people come or leave cities is because lack of jobs, potential of jobs. And if you know a little bit about what goes on in each of these cities or a few cities, it'll help your responses to shine and to look better. Just because the FRQs aren't focused on urban itself, we will design rubrics that include answers that could potentially be answered from the urban unit. So we'll include those type of answers. The other thing is a model called the gravity model. So make sure you spend a little bit of time look at the gravity model. Gravity model has two applications. One as a migration pull factor, where people are drawn to it because of the size of a city, and a little bit in retail, which is more the economic unit, but there is that retail aspect to it. Bigger the stores, more people come in those areas. But spend a little bit of time reviewing the gravity model, and making sure you understand it. It'll enrich your responses and give you some more ideas of how to answer FRQs if you're faced with a migration question. 2.11, rural to urban migration. Huge trend in global migration patterns. And so we need to be aware of that. And we also need to be aware of the impact of migration on settlements and cities and towns. So as people pour in from the rural areas, that they're coming to the cities. Now, these would be the squatter settlements, and now that would be normally studied in the urban unit, but it doesn't mean that you can't add that information if there's a question about impacts of rural to urban migration and discuss urban patterns. That would be
I'm going to stop him right here because one of the things that I don't know, maybe we just got lucky in the term in like in terms of what we covered with urban, but you know, the if you think about the squatter settlements and you think about the Latin American model in particular, specifically if we look at like Rio de Janeiro and the favelas on the outside of the city, one thing when we do review rural to urban migration, or when we do review migration, I am going to have you watch a video that talks about the impact on cities when you have a massive amount of people moving to those cities for jobs and other pull factors. So we're not quite done with urban yet, but mostly done, I guess.
totally acceptable. So I would encourage you to read some information about what happens with the rapid migration of people from rural areas, especially in less developed countries, into these cities, and the tension that it puts upon that city. Here's another example of rural to urban migration. We have a couple maps here. The bottom left is a cartogram that just kind of shows where rural urban migration is occurring. And if you could mention a few of the cities that happen to be inside of those areas that have huge rural to urban migration, hey, that makes your response look better and stronger. The one map on the right, the urban shift, this is India. Now, you could probably figure out that we have Delhi and South Delhi and Northeast Delhi, but if you know if Delhi is a city, that's going to help you in your response in Mumbai. So while the focus of the question is not on cities, knowing some names of some cities and a little bit about this will be very beneficial to you as you respond to these FRQs. Unit number 3, culture. So cultural landscape is a big pattern and something that we're going to spend a lot of time with, and I think is going to be potentially on the exam. But ethnic neighborhoods, we talked about it in
How does he
ethnicity. Wait, ethnic
know?
neighborhoods, that sounds a lot like urban to me. Redlining and the tension that can exist because of that and the racial segregation. So we need to be aware of those concepts. While yes, you might study that in urban, you could have studied in ethnicity and culture. So make sure that you're familiar with that. 3.6, cultural ideas and practices can change from small scale to large scale processes, such as what? Urbanization and globalization. This is that pop versus folk culture tension that cities are these um, where culture change rapidly, and be aware of the impacts that urbanization and close proximity to people living together has on culture and the interactions that occur, either mixing cultures, blending cultures, culturation, all kinds of different concepts have a play here. And if you understand the urbanization process, your answers will be better. Now, this is where the concept of world city or global city comes into play. Now, it's definitely in the urban unit, but world cities are these big cities that have huge influence on the culture, power, media, economics, and politics of the world. And so, if we understand the places like New York City and London and Tokyo and Shanghai have huge influence on a global pop cultural phenomena, then that will make our answers better. And that's ultimately one of our goals. And we should be able to talk about those in our responses if it's appropriate. And then finally, 3.4, types of diffusion. You've already learned about hierarchical diffusion. Well, hierarchical diffusion is basically going from big cities to medium cities to small cities. And so that's a little bit about cities. And so understanding a few examples of that process will make your answers respond, be better, and improve that. So make sure you understand hierarchical diffusion and the role that urban systems play in that. It's not hard, but make sure that you understand the connection with urban geography and not ignore that. And then the last unit, political geography. Political geography has lots of connections. 4.10, centripetal and centrifugal forces. Once again, that urban versus rural tension that exists. The centrifugal forces of the urban areas, the demands of the urban areas, and the power that they want versus the rural areas and the farming. This is a centripetal or centrifugal force that can exist. Regionalism. Now, most regionalisms are centered around some sort of city, and we'll talk about Spain a little bit here with Barcelona and Madrid and the tension that exists between those two. But cities are usually at the core of this, not, and so be aware of that. 4.7, forms of governance. Political power. Well, most capitals are cities last time I checked, so we need to be a little bit aware of that. And capitals can exist at the country scale or the state scale, subnational or province scale. And so be aware of that interaction and the power and the role that that plays. Also, with unitary versus federal, one of the big connections here is this concept of primate city versus rank size model. So I want to make sure that you spend a little bit of time looking at that. And I've got a slide here on primate city in a moment that I'll talk about to explain it.
I like this
But
slide, you
first,
guys.
what we have here is this is from last year's question. And over here on the
The one I
left,
scored. Ugh.
we have a map of Spain. And we have Madrid. And this was a question on political geography about devolution. And this tells me that it's the capital. But if I also know that Catalonia, big city there, is Barcelona, this helps me to improve my answer as I discuss the concept of devolution and the potential split between these two regions. Here in Nigeria, Abuja was a relocated capital from Lagos down here on the coast up to here. And the reasons for why that was moved is important. It's a political, cultural concept, but it's a relocated capital. And understanding that would help. And this is a political geography question with a little bit of urban geography that makes your answers better. And students that did this last year, their responses were strong. They were great if they started talking about those things. So I mentioned this concept of primate city. Well, there's an association between primate cities and unitary states. Now, it's not a for sure thing. But when you think of France and I say, hey, what's the largest city in France? Most people can think of that and they say Paris. Well, what a primate city is, it's one city that's way larger, much more dominant, and more than twice the size of the next largest city. And it's dominant both in power and influence and population. Well, if a city in a country develops that way, it's also most likely a unitary state, which France is, where you have power concentrated in the capital. It's a primate city. So unitary state is a total fair political geography question. And if you discuss the role of a primate city in that, that would enhance your answer. The other way is the federal system. So in the United States, we have a distribution of power and influence for the federal system where we share power. Now, the rank size rule, I want you to make sure you read a little bit about the rank size rule, but our cities are more designed that the largest city is New York City, approximately 20 million. And then there's two cities about half the size, Chicago over here, here's Chicago, and here's Los Angeles, about half the size of New York City. Now, because of our federal system, we have a more even distribution of power and city size to our system. So understanding rank size rule will develop a deeper understanding of the federal system and the shared powers and how it looks spatially on our maps. So spend some time looking at rank size rule and making sure you look at it. So the goal is to make our FRQs rock. That's what we want to do. We want our FRQs and our answers to stand out. There will be no FRQ focused on urban, but knowledge of urban geography can make our answers more complete and have them stand out. So keep that in mind as you're studying this and looking at those vocabulary terms that I've mentioned previously. So look for my video on agriculture and urban. It'll be coming out soon. And welcome to Team Awesome. Take care and have a great night.
Team Awesome. All right, so just a little bit about, I'm going to go back because I forgot to mention something here. Just a little bit about how those economic and urban concepts could come up. I think it's good to think about. And a lot of those concepts we actually covered. The only thing we didn't cover was impacts on cities as a result of mass migration, but I got that covered. All right, so the other thing that I heard was that because there's only two FRQs, you guys can pretty much expect that both of the FRQs are going to, in some way, ask questions or ask you to identify your knowledge on all of these topics. I don't know what the questions are going to look like. There still hasn't been a lot. Is it 7 part? Is it not? I'm quite certain that the 15-minute question is not going to be 7 parts. I think the 25 question one with the two stimulus might. So just be prepared to have all of the units being assessed on just these two FRQs. Okay, so what are you going to be asked to do? You're going to be asked to, or you're going to be given an authentic real world situation or scenario, and you're going to have to describe, explain, and apply concepts, processes, or models to whatever that situation is. You're going to be asked to analyze patterns, relationships, and outcomes or consequences, results, whatever you want there. Notice how what's missing is that there's not an identify or define. One of the things College Board has been very specific about is that they're not going to have some sort of easy, quick lookup way for you to sort of like get an easy point. So I think those are gone. However, I do think that if you're given a map such as this, they might ask you to identify the patterns on the map. So they won't ask you to say define push factor because you can just look that up, but they might ask you something specifically related to the map that could be like a lower order thinking question, just kind of what I think is going to happen, I guess. And you heard it right. Like the test is going to be open note. They can't stop you from looking at your notes, but this is a timed test, and you are going to run out of time if you are trying to use other resources. There is not a doubt in my mind that you are going to need all 25 minutes to answer that first FRQ and all 15 minutes to answer that second. So the best thing that you can do is just be prepared. And then can't somebody's like blasting music in my house. I don't know if you guys can hear that right. But like when a dance party is needed, a dance party just needs to be had. So I am sorry if you can hear the music in the background. Okay, can you phone a friend? No, don't phone a friend. Like, don't be on the phone talking to a friend. I don't know how AP is going to like manage the whole cheating thing, but here's what I can tell you. They are sending me your tests and they're expecting me to examine your tests. And if you are writing in a way that I have not seen, I am required like you're using different words than I normally see you use, or I'm used to you writing short FRQs and suddenly you've got like a 3-page FRQ. Like I am required to like turn you in if I notice potential academic dishonesty. And if you guys get caught, please don't, first of all, put me in that position because I do not like that position. But if you get caught, like that could void not only this AP score, but subsequent AP scores. It could affect your SAT. Like, just don't do it. Okay? Don't do it. All right. So, how should you prepare? Have a plan. Make sure you're studying the big ideas. As you saw from David Palmer's video, like there are threads of units that connect to each other. So start thinking about how this course ties together, and I'm going to help you. Of course, that's my plan. Quiz each other, teach someone. Like I've been meeting with my friends on Facebook Messenger or on Zoom or Google Hangouts. Like talk to each other, get some virtual like study groups going. Use the resources that we, meaning Mr. Baustein and I post, and I'm going to show you some more on the next slide, and show up to our Zoom meetings so you can get your questions answered, okay? So just now is the time. I am not teaching you new information. We are just reviewing for the next 5 weeks. All right, so I wanted to show you what the review schedule is going to look like because this is your weekly schedule. Every single week is going to look like this except for this week, obviously, because you're watching this video on Monday. So this week is going to look a little differently, but like everything else is going to look like this. So on Monday, you're always going to be looking at the unit overview and the course articulation, which is the CED, to look at what it was that you were expected to learn. I want you to review topics. In other words, you have to identify what do you know? Like, do you know these words? Do you know these concepts? Are you strong? Like, fine, you know them, don't study them. If you're like, oh my God, I have no idea what relative direction is, then that's going to be something you have to look up. And then finally, as you're kind of like identifying your strengths and weaknesses, I want you to identify questions for the Zoom review that's going to happen every single Wednesday, okay? From 9 o'clock. Actually, this is wrong. Shoot. It's actually from 9:30 to 10:30, but I will change that. I will change that. So Tuesday, Tuesday, you're always going to have some practice. So I'm going to attach basically a study guide, but not a traditional study guide. It is all application. And so the expectation is that you complete the grand review questions again, so that you use your work on Monday, you use your work on Tuesday, so that you can come in from the Zoom meeting and answer questions. Wednesday is always going to be application of a current event. So I'm going to post an article or a video, and you're going to complete a 4-level analysis. I'm going to give you instructions on how to do this and some practice this week, so you'll know how to do this. And then every single Thursday is going to be a practice FRQ. Notice how there's no Friday? That's because you don't have class on Friday. Now, classwork. So this is how you're going to demonstrate your learning. This is what you're going to turn into Google Classroom on a daily basis, okay? There's going to be a Google form every Monday where I have you identify your strengths and weaknesses based on the course articulation. That's going to help me design how I'm going to address some of the review concepts. So if you guys are all struggling with like learning target 1.1, then I'm going to do like a little mini review on learning target 1.1 or whatever it might be. To On Tuesday, like there's an optional extension. So it's the grand review and an extension, but it's not always going to be optional. Like I want you to watch a video on scale this week because I think we still struggle with scale. And then there's going to be a discussion question and you'll submit that. Wednesday, you'll turn in your 4-level analysis so I can make sure that you're doing some application work and I can kind of gauge to see if you are struggling with this. The most important thing that you're going to do the whole week is to complete your FRQ. This is what's going in the grade book. These are all like homework grades. This is the only grade that's going to like kind of count. I'm not sure if it's going to be an FRQ grade. I have to talk to Mr. Baustein about that. We still have some more planning to do before this goes live, but I promise I'll tell you once we figure it out. Um, Now, Monday's Zoom meeting is always going to be like, I'm going to read your FRQs, and it's going to be like, here are some tips to improve your FRQ. So if you feel really confident about the FRQ and you're like, I nailed this, okay, cool, don't come to the meeting. But if you're like, oh my God, I'm struggling, come to the meeting. No Zoom meeting on Tuesday, but you can ask via questions via Google Hangouts. And no meetings on Thursday, but you can ask meetings via Google Hangout. And this is why I messed up because it's 9 to 10. I'll just make them all 9:30 to 10:30. I'll change that. Review tools. So I am going to link specific tools to for every single day. So you'll have a Quizlet, a Quizzes, an iScore5, which hopefully you've downloaded. There's our class website. I provided like a giant review packet for like all the units. So you just look at the unit that we're reviewing. Hopefully you signed up to get that free review book. I added something for this week on models. And then I'm going to give you a review Google slide presentation. Now, I did not create any of these. Like I created this, so I scoured the internet and talked to all my online friends to find the best resources I could. So almost all of this stuff here comes from other teachers. Now, the last thing that I want to point out is that this cool thing that AP is doing for you. So AP has put together an AP classroom on YouTube. And you'll notice here, I've actually watched a couple of them, but you'll notice here that like you have access to all Unit 6 stuff. So eventually you're going to watch a Unit 6 for me when it comes to migration and challenges of urban changes and sustainability. Here's some review of Unit 7. So if you're struggling with any of the economic development stuff, and notice, by the way, like it's not all of like 7.1 is not there. 7.2 is, well, 7.2 is there. So 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, 7.5, all like these are all reviews of economic geography. And the people that have organized this site here are only covering the topics that might show up or might help improve your FRQs in units 1 through 6. So it's not superfluous information, it's not extra. It's actually really helpful and important. When I watched the first one, I don't know, I watched the whole first, some of them is showing. Anyway, this one was really cool because she kind of went through, the lecturer went through and said, here's what 6.1, where it could show up in other areas of the course articulation and so on and so forth. But if you look down here, starting on April 9th, There's going to be population reviews. So if you don't like the way that we're reviewing, there's all of these other options for you to review using somebody else's voice besides mine, I suppose. Oops, wait, come back. Ah, too many things open. Okay, so going back here. Make it big. And I think that that's it. So I know this is a really long video. You don't really have anything else to do besides watch this video. So I hope it helped. I'm here for you. Let's just 5 weeks, you guys, 5 weeks from tomorrow, and your test will be done. Have a good rest of your day. Talk to you later. Ah.